At a time of year when most gardens are winding down, many prairie plants like these are just reaching their peak. Welcome to the Wisconsin Gardener. I'm your host, Shelley Ryan. On this edition of the Wisconsin Gardener, we'll look at a variety of projects, including garden cleanup and how and why to test your soil. But first, we travel to Columbia County to look at some of the late season stars of the prairie. Whether you've got acres and acres or a small yard like this one in Barneveld, Wisconsin, a prairie garden can provide year-round beauty and interest. That's next on the Wisconsin Gardener.
Major funding for the production of the Wisconsin Gardener has been provided by Jung Seed and Nursery Company with garden centers in Randolph, Stevens Point, Madison, and Sun Prairie, and Fiskars, a Wisconsin manufacturer of ergonomic cutting tools for the home and garden, distributed worldwide.
Prairies and prairie plants are becoming increasingly popular in Wisconsin gardens, and it's easy to see why. I'm with Neil DeBole, president of Prairie Nursery near Westfield, Wisconsin. And Neil, these grasses are just gorgeous. This blue stem is just glowing this time of year.
Yeah, this is little blue stem, which is one of my favorite prairie grasses because it has a really nice bluish green color in the summer, and in the fall it turns a lovely crimson, orange, yellow, green mix, then finally moving all the way into crimson for the winter. So this grass helps give the prairie really 4 seasons of interest.
Now, you've got a whole field of it planted here.
Yeah, in this situation I've got about a half an acre, and you know, maybe 10 years ago you'd think, oh, we'll just plant that to turf grass or something like that, and then mow it every week or every 2 weeks, and fertilize it so you can mow it some more, and so on and so forth. But what more and more people are doing is they're saying, let's rethink our landscapes and the way we're interrelating with nature, and why not restore some of the native plants, like the prairie plants, and create a situation that's good for the environment, encourages birds and butterflies and other wildlife, and saves us time and eventually saves us money.
Well, my favorite reason still is something to look out my window, even in January. That's pretty.
This is beautiful in the winter, especially a little snow mixed in. You have this red coming up out of the snow. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Well, let's look at some of the other plants that we're likely to see in a native prairie.
Great.
Now, what about the concept of plant community, that these coexist?
Well, if you look at the prairie, it really is a very specific plant community, which is a mix of different flowers and grasses together. And what we're doing is basically copying nature and saying, how did nature make a prairie? And we take those elements and then we can maybe stylize them a little bit, but basically maintain the ecological integrity of that plant community. So we mix grasses with legumes, the nitrogen-fixing native plants like prairie clovers and others like that, and asters, goldenrods, all kinds of different flowers mixed with the grasses. Together, they work to squeeze out the weeds through their root systems. So we're letting nature do the work for us. We work with nature instead of against her.
That's great.
Well, Shelley, here's a perfect example of the diversity you can pack into a relatively small area on your prairie.
Yeah, you've got a lot of stuff just right here in this, what, 2 or 3 feet?
Yeah, just a few square feet. And here we have the sky blue aster, which is a late bloomer. Here we are in October and it's still blooming.
So asters in general are late bloomers?
Yeah, September, October.
Most of them?
Yeah, so you get that kind of fall finale in your prairie with the asters.
Okay. What about the plant in front of it then?
This is a really unusual plant, and it's very rare in Wisconsin. This is wild quinine, which has beautiful, pure white flowers in July and August, and now here later in the season it's starting to kind of turn to kind of a grayish color.
Yeah, but these seed pods, these seed heads are beautiful all by themselves.
You can do a lot with this. Another seed head, and this is another rare plant, pale purple coneflower. This also has beautiful flowers in the summer, June and July, and then you have these nice little seed heads that you can use for dried arrangements. So you get double duty out of your prairie. You can enjoy the flowers in the summer and then bring in either the flowers as cut flowers, or bring them in as dried seed heads.
Or just leave them out here and enjoy it outside your window,
Exactly,
too.
exactly.
Now, with rare plants like these, though, we don't, how do we recommend people grow them?
Oh, get your own seeds from a reputable source. There are some people who still think it's appropriate to go along the roadsides and dig plants, which is a good way to kill plants.
Yeah.
And I think it's illegal, too.
So especially with a rare one like this?
It's definitely illegal with these. They'll put you in jail.
Okay, that'll take care of that question then. All right, another one, this one doesn't have a seed head or anything, but it's a striking plant, just the leaves.
Yeah, this is compass plant. This is a baby. It's only 5 years old.
This is 5 years old?
Yeah, it's very slow growing, but this plant can live 40, 50, 60 years. And nobody really knows how long they live, but they're very, very long lived. And it's called compass plant because the leaves tend to orient themselves north-south.
So could I use this if I was lost in the prairie?
Yeah, possibly. I wouldn't recommend it, but they typically will line up north and south.
They really will.
And they'll have seed heads that, when it's mature, it'll get 6, 7, 8, 10 feet tall.
Oh, wow. Now, you had said that this site that we're on had some problems with it. And that's why a prairie was such a good solution for you.
This is basically bedrock. This
That's the
prairie was
problem.
planted on a little bit of soil over some dolomite bedrock. And one of the reasons that a prairie is a great solution for a problem situation is that they're drought tolerant. They're able to tolerate all kinds of difficult conditions. And so by selecting the right plants that will grow on the site, I can get all kinds of flowers and grasses with not a lot of work.
And on top of solid rock, too.
Exactly, exactly.
Well, you know, one of the things that I think I like of the prairie are the diversity of colors, the textures, and of heights. Now, as you said, the compass plant will get 10 feet tall. Are there grasses that will match that kind of tall flower?
Yeah, there are, and that way you can mix some of the taller plants with some of the taller grasses. In fact, one of my favorites is right back here. This is Indian grass, the tall one, about 5, 6 feet tall.
With the bronzy seed heads
Yeah,
almost?
yeah, exactly. They're
Beautiful.
bronze spear-like seed heads. It's gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. And that will hold up pretty well all the way into early winter, and then it will drop its seeds. But typically the stems will stay erect over the winter.
Well, what is the more oat-looking grass in front of it?
Oat?
The shorter?
Exactly, side oats grama.
Okay.
It's about a 2 to 3 foot tall grass. It's one of the shorter prairie grasses. And an Indian grass was placed in there specifically to give this kind of vertical punctuation to that landscape.
Kind of a statement that way.
Yeah, exactly. So you get the flowers all summer, and then in the winter you get these grasses mingling together, creating their own landscape. It's really like two landscapes in one.
Well, now I still see a late season bloomer, the goldenrods.
Yeah, this is showy goldenrod, and it's still going on. And you can see all the insects that are still using it. Look at all the butterflies back in there that are still pollinating. And this is very, very important late season nectar source for a variety of beneficial wildlife.
And so we're providing seeds, we're providing shelter, color for us, just about everything we need.
And the birds eat the seeds in the fall, and the insects that are attracted to the flowers during the summer are one of the prime foods for young baby birds.
So lots of reasons to plant a prairie.
Lots of reasons.
Great. Thanks, Neil.
Thanks, Shelley.
Next up, Neil's going to show us an easy way to get a garden bed ready for next year. No digging involved. I'm with Neil DeBole again of Prairie Nursery, and Neil's going to show us how to turn this entire area into a garden bed with no digging. Now, Neil, you promised no digging. How am I going to turn this all into a garden bed for planting?
Well, basically what we're going to do is we're going to smother what's growing here. And you can see this was just a wild grass field. I mowed everything down to basically to a couple inches.
Sure.
And now we're going to cover this area with newspaper.
Just plain old newspaper,
Plain old
not
newspaper.
plastic.
We're going to use it in full-size hunks, overlapped, about 50%.
So you're not unfolding it, in other
No,
words.
you're just going to lay it right down as it is.
Okay.
And that is going to help smother what's here.
All right.
Okay. And then we're going to add a large amount of garden waste material or leaves from raking up in the fall. And we do this in the fall because that's when this material is available. So we bring all our garden waste from the garden. Instead of taking it to the compost pile, we're going to compost it right in place in our new garden bed.
So you said garden waste, leaves.
Leaves.
Could I not just do this and smother it with bark mulch?
I wouldn't suggest bark mulch because bark mulch robs the soil of nitrogen.
Oh, okay.
And so you'll create a long-term low nitrogen problem in your soil by using bark mulch. Also, you don't want to use things like pine needles, spruce needles, because those acidify the soil.
What about black walnut leaves?
Oh, black walnut leaves, not a good idea.
Okay.
Because black walnut leaves exude a chemical that are toxic to other plants called juglone.
Yep.
And that can also stay in your soil for quite some time, so it's not a good choice.
You won't be able to grow anything then.
Well, not very many things.
Okay.
You can grow raspberries in there, but that's about it. But if you take regular maple tree leaves, ash, basswood, almost any normal shade tree, hickory, oak, these are excellent leaves to use. So a combination of your garden waste, leaves, and lawn clippings can also work well. Lawn cuttings. What we do is we pile this up 2-3 feet high, and this is a minimum amount you need.
This is, you've got about 2 feet here
About
now, maybe
2
a
feet.
foot and a half.
Yeah, yeah. And this is going to then be stabilized by old boards, an old pallet, or maybe you have an old piece of carpet. You can roll out a piece of carpet just to hold it in place so it doesn't blow away.
Oh, okay. So for my yard where there's a high wind and this would all blow 5 miles away,
Exactly.
this will just lay something down to keep it there.
Exactly. So it doesn't end up in your neighbor's yard and they get a free compost pile.
Okay.
So, and then this will go down over the winter, okay, as it rots in, okay? And then the next year, you're going to leave this all in place.
So I'm not planting next spring.
I'm not planting next spring. This is a full year process.
So is there anything I do next spring?
Just sit there and watch it rot.
I like
or
that.
if it goes down to like a foot or maybe less, then you can take lawn clippings, grass clippings,
Just from the,
right, and then augment the pile.
Because you want to keep it about a foot.
Right, because you have to smother everything underneath it. You want to keep everything underneath there from coming up through it.
Okay.
If it gets too thin, then you run the risk of plants coming up through it.
Okay.
Okay. By the end of next year in the fall, you should have been able to kill everything underneath there because basically you're smothering it during the whole growing season. The plants can't grow and they die underneath.
Okay.
Now what a lot of people will do then is they'll wait till the next spring and then go and plant the next spring. So it's really a year and a half.
So then it's really decayed.
Exactly.
But I could plant next fall if I really
You
wanted.
could plant next fall if you wanted to.
Okay.
And then you can go in and till this in if you want. If you have a really bad clay soil or sandy soil, it does benefit to till it into that soil and
Because
augment that.
you're enriching the existing soil.
Exactly, with all that organic matter.
Okay.
Or you can plant directly into the decomposed organic matter.
Well, then you're planting to a weed-free bed, basically.
As long as you didn't bring in any weeds
This-
in the organic matter. That's what's so nice about leaves and grass clippings. They're
really
essentially weed-free.
Okay.
It's that whole surface layer doesn't have any weeds in it.
Gee,
That
that
works
sounds
great.
easy way, and I still don't have to dig.
Right,
I like it.
great.
Thanks, Neil.
Thank you.
Next up, how and why to get your soil tested. I'm with UW Extension soil specialist Sherry Combs, and we're standing in the middle of a W in her garden. Sherry, why do you have a W in your garden?
Well, I intend to plant a new garden in here next year of vegetables, and I need to test my soil, and I'm going to be sampling at each point of this W today.
Why do we need to test soil?
Well, how would you decide how much fertilizer to apply for this site for a vegetable garden?
So looking at it isn't going to give me any answers, is it?
No answers at all. In fact, that's not a very good way.
I have friends that put in lime every year. I mean, is there just not a simple way to do this?
No, there isn't really. The simplest way is to take a test, and that's actually the most efficient, because then we are able to match exactly what your soil has for nutrient supply with what your crop needs for nutrient supply, and either tell you not to apply more nutrients in lime or to instruct you how much and what kind to apply.
So too much isn't necessarily good?
No, you can get some poor crop growth with too much nutrients. Also, some environmental concerns come up with too much nutrient additions.
Well, I know, like, if I over add nitrogen, I end up with great leaves and very few flowers and fruits.
That's right, and that's one example of detrimental crop growth.
Okay, you've convinced me. How do I go about doing this? You said sample at every point.
Yeah, we'll use a probe, and this is a standard tool for soil scientists. It can be borrowed at the Madison or Marshfield Soil Testing Laboratories or at your local county extension office. And you'll push it into the soil to a depth of about 6 to 8 inches, because that's what I'm going to be tilling here next year. So I'll be mixing this soil up to a depth of 6 to 8 inches.
Isn't it easier to probe if we were already tilled, though?
Oh, sure, it's easier to probe, but you can't get a very good control of the depth that you take when it's tilled. So we recommend that you
this
sample
first.
prior to tillage.
Okay. And then we dump it in there. Now, we're going to do this at every point of the W. What if I don't have a probe?
Well, you can easily use a trowel or a shovel, and we'll show you the trowel. Step it into the soil to a depth of about 6 to 8 inches, as we did the probe.
Same depth.
Bring up the wedge, and then carve off the corner of the soil and place it in the bucket as well.
Now, do I have to take this whole bucket into the soil lab?
No, we don't want that much soil to test. We test a small portion of it, so it's very important that you take a good sample. But what we want you to do is fill up this bag with about 1 to 2 cups of the soil after you've mixed up all
stir
of
it
the
up.
subsamples in that bucket.
Okay, and what's the blue sheet for then?
Well, this tells us what crop you're going to grow. And since the recommendations are specific for the type of crop, and whether that's vegetables or flowers or fruit crops, we need to have you fill out this blue sheet to give us that information.
Okay, then what do we get back from the lab?
You'll get a report back that says for the sample that you sent in, what the level of pH, organic matter, available phosphorus, and available potassium are, if those levels are low or optimum or excessive, and then how much nutrient and lime that you may need for optimum crop growth.
Okay, why are we doing this at the end of the growing season?
Well, I'm going to till next spring, so this is a good time to do it before tillage.
Okay.
I only have to do it once every 3 years, and so it gives you a lot of time after you get your report back to think about how you're going to plan your garden, how you're going to apply fertilizer, and get ready for spring.
Great. Thanks, Sherry. You can find out more about soil tests from your local county extension office. Here we've got a garden bed all cleaned up and ready to plant next spring. But you have to take all the debris out of the bed and do something with it. I'm with Dane County Extension Ag and Natural Resources Agent Mindy Habecker. And Mindy, we've got a pile of garden debris here and we've got to do something with it. You were going to show me how to compost it. Tell me what compost is first. Let's start out with the definition of compost.
Well, Shelley, compost is just biologically broken down organic materials that form something similar to a soil. It has a granular texture, a pleasant smell like the earth, and it is a perfect soil amendment with a lot of nutrients and a lot of benefits to your soil.
I've heard somebody call it black gold.
That's right.
All right, what goes into it?
Well, you want a backbone of about 2 parts green materials or high nitrogen materials to 1 part brown materials. The green materials can be such things as what's coming out of your last year's garden.
Your vines, your grasses.
Your broccolis, your annual flowers, all sorts of things that aren't heavily diseased or insect infested. You don't want to put those materials in.
So grass clippings count?
Right, that's another major green material, your grass clippings. And then your brown materials can be such things as corn stalks, of which anything that's long like vines or corn stalks, you want to snip them so that they're no more than 2 feet long, or you have problems turning your pile with a pitchfork.
So keep it in small sizes.
Right.
Now if green is high in nitrogen, brown is high in...
It's high in carbon.
Carbon,
and your
okay.
leaves fit into that straw. If you have a little bit of sawdust, that would fit in there too.
All right, what about kitchen scraps?
Kitchen scraps are a wonderful addition. They fit in with the green materials, and you want to add such things as your fruit waste, your vegetable waste, but out of kitchen scraps, you don't want to add any fatty foods or any meats into it. But coffee grounds can go in, eggshells. Your fatty foods or meats will lead to rancid piles perhaps, and also...
Raccoons maybe.
That's right, things like raccoons.
All right, if we don't want to add those things, are there other things we shouldn't be adding to compost?
Well, I touched on one. You don't want to add any noxious weeds. Weeds that if your pile doesn't heat up enough that you may have persistent problems in future years. And another thing you don't want to add are any pet waste, such as cat or dog waste, of which they can transmit some of the diseases that they have to us. So you want to keep those things out of your compost pile too.
Okay. Well, now here's a pile we just kind of started. Is the size appropriate? Does it make a difference?
The size is great. You want to check with your local ordinances first. They may dictate where your pile can be placed, the size of the pile, whether you need a bin structure, and also what you can add to your pile.
Okay.
But a pile that's about 4 feet by 4 feet by 4 feet is great. That will give it enough mass that it will heat up, even in the wintertime some.
Okay.
But it isn't too large that oxygen can't penetrate, because what breaks down the materials is bacteria, which needs oxygen to breathe and respire, just like we do.
Why do you have a layer of soil on top of your garden debris here? It's just dirt.
The soil actually provides you with all the bacteria you need to get a compost pile started. It's ubiquitous in the soil itself, and you don't need any special additives such as they sell in a lot of expensive catalogs. You can just add either finished compost or soil, and it will provide everything you need.
So that's our starter.
Yes.
What else?
Well, we want to make sure it's moistened. That bacteria, the pile should be about as wet as a moist sponge, so the bacteria have enough moisture to thrive on. And you can moisten it as you go. If you haven't moistened it until your pile is up to the 4 feet, then make it somewhat concave at the top, and that will collect the moisture and throughout the year. But
okay, and then
as wet as a moist sponge.
You said turn it once in a while and we're done.
That's right, yes. It will compost primarily in the center. Your outside ring won't be composted, so you want to flip your pile over so that what's on the outside goes in the center, and it heats up, right, and composts completely.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mindy. So go ahead and compost all season long, whatever the season. We've talked a lot about getting gardens ready for next spring. Let's not forget about the plants that may be already in the ground. Some of them are going to need winter protection. We're at Berner Botanical Gardens, and I'm with the retired director and rose breeder, Bill Radler. Bill, roses come to mind right away. Some of these need protection. What kinds?
Well, most of your modern roses need protection, your hybrid teas, grandifloras, floribundas, miniatures. There's few exceptions, like the roses in Canada that have been bred for hardiness. Some of the modern shrub roses are hardier also. But for the most part, everyday roses, they do need winter protection.
Well, then what's the most important thing we do to help them survive a Wisconsin winter?
Well, the most important thing is when you plant the rose bush. And here I've depotted a rose, and it shows the graft union. This graft union needs to be insulated from the effects of winter by being planted deeply into the ground. So I would recommend about 2 inches above the
This is the
graft
graft
union,
Okay.
the soil level should eventually be.
Now that's a lot deeper than I imagined. I think most of mine are more like right here.
If you have it at soil level, you might get by. But if it's above, I would recommend transplanting for sure this fall.
So this deep. Oh, is it too late then? I mean, you said this fall. Can I transplant even up until the ground is frozen?
As long as the ground isn't frozen, you can transplant.
Okay, so we've got our roses correctly planted. What's the next step?
Well, there's many winterizing methods that can be used. I think the styrofoam rose cone method is perhaps the best and easiest for the average person, and I prefer the double styrofoam cone method.
Well, let's look at how we do that then.
Well, first of all, you need to tie up your rose into a compact cylinder, as is shown here. And the tie is made low on the plant because we're going to be cutting that plant off. But let me first tell you, the rose grows into dormancy because of the shorter days and
Cooler
the
temps.
cooler temperatures. And we're talking about you want to start the tying up process while the temperature is warm and comfortable for you to be in the garden.
I'm more likely to be out there then.
Right.
Okay.
So mid-October till mid-November is a good time. The week after Thanksgiving, the temperatures are really going to start getting cold.
Cold.
And then we want to cut the rose bush back, as I've done here. I've cut the top off of this rose bush.
Wow,
and
you're
you can
taking
see
that
there's
much?
a large amount.
Wow.
And you want it to fit within the rose cone. So when you tie up, you got to make sure that you have a secure tie low on the plant.
Now, this just seems so drastic. Can't I leave it a little longer and let the stems actually touch the sides of the cone?
Those stems won't make it through the winter if they touch the sides or the top.
Okay, so I'll kill it that way. So we cut it this far and it's happy that way.
Right, and you're going to be cutting it back that short in spring anyway.
Oh,
10
okay.
inches or less.
So
So you can prepare your rose cones ahead of time by putting 4 holes in the top to allow for ventilation.
Okay.
And so this is the week after Thanksgiving, or when the
Okay.
temperature gets 25 or lower at night. And you put this over the rose cone. Actually, the roses can take to 0 to 10 degrees when they're fully dormant. And you can't see the dormancy by looking at the plant. They all look like they're green and
They're
alive until frost really kills the leaves.
So pay attention to the temps in your area.
And the
Okay.
time of the year, week
Okay.
after Thanksgiving. And after you put the styrofoam cone on, you want to put soil or mulch around the base to help seal it, and then weigh the cone down with a brick so the wind doesn't blow it away.
Okay. And that's it then? We're done?
Not completely. I mentioned we have a double cone.
Yes.
This is a non-ventilated cone, and you put that on after the temperatures are below 0.
So the really cold part of winter.
Right, the really cold part.
Well, why can't I just take off the cone that's got the holes in it and just replace it with this cone when it gets really cold?
You can try it, but it's going to be frozen to the ground. That won't be possible.
Okay, so we just take the brick off, slide it right down,
Put the cone on,
brick back.
brick back, and then wait for warm weather. In the spring of the year, if we get unusually warm weather, you don't want heat to build up in the cone because that will cause the rose to go out of dormancy and then be injured by temperatures that it would normally not be.
So are you talking about, I think of the January thaws, things like that?
That's a possibility, but if leaving the top one on is going to hold the cold down in the cone, you want that to happen. In the spring of the year, this changes because we get warmer days and the frost is starting to come out of the ground. You want that frost to stay there, so sometimes ventilating the cone in the spring of the year would be more judicious.
Okay, so if the ground is still frozen, we're almost better off leaving the cone on to keep the
Right.
cold in then.
Right.
And then it comes off permanently in April?
Yes, the middle of April, not
Okay.
sooner.
Okay.
By the end of April, you definitely want to make sure you have the cone off.
And then hopefully we'll have a lovely rose coming up.
You betcha.
Great. Thanks, Bill. The way to start out is with a good, hardy variety of rose. Berner Botanical Gardens publishes an annual list of outstanding varieties. We'll tell you how to get that. Well, just when we thought it was safe to put down our shovels, it turns out there's still a lot to do before we can enjoy our winter's rest. If you have any questions, your local county extension agent is always a good resource. And remember, when planning ahead for next spring, reserve a spot for a few prairie plants. They work well even in a small rock garden like this. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time on the Wisconsin Gardener.
Major funding for the production of The Wisconsin Gardener has been provided by Jung Seed and Nursery Company with garden centers in Randolph, Stevens Point, Madison, and Sun Prairie, and Fiskars, a Wisconsin manufacturer of ergonomic cutting tools for the home and garden, distributed worldwide. For a free one-year subscription to the Wisconsin Gardener's quarterly newsletter, write to the Wisconsin Gardener Notebook, Wisconsin Public Television, 821 University Avenue, Madison, Wisconsin, 53706.